Welcome back to another episode of the Better Not Better podcast. Today I have another special guest to talk about albinism. But before we get into that, I want to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm going to drop the intro right here. Remember to live each day with the aim of becoming better and not bitter. So guys, thank you for lending your ears and your attention to this episode. Today, I have with me a special guest. He's a Charlotte photographer, individual with albinism, creative. But before I get into it, I'll let him introduce himself. Please welcome Gavin Boulware.
What's going on? How are you? Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
As you stated, I am a Charlotte photographer. I'm a fellow podcaster. I love all the creators because I know how it is. A, doing a podcast, A, trying to be creative, and then, another thing of having albinism. So I'm so glad to be here. I'm super excited for this podcast, and thank you so much for having me. Seriously.
Thank you for being here. I kind of found your content because someone else with albinism had posted a reel that you had done in their IG story. And I was like, oh, first of all, this is a photographer doing a dope reel. And then second of all, he got albinism. Let me do some digging. And then I was like, man, he looked like he busy, but let me just try and reach out and see what happens. So I really appreciate you, spending some time with us on the Better Not Better podcast.
Absolutely. And I'm here. Look, anytime, I tell people all the time, like being a creative, it's one of those things where it's like, if you have an opportunity to connect with somebody else, always take that opportunity. Always make the time. Always figure out, the only time you should not be able to work with that person if it's just not possible. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes that happens where it's not possible. But for this, connecting with you, seeing somebody else that has albinism is like, hey, I'm a creative. I was just like, oh, it's a no-brainer. I'm doing this. So I'm super glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, we're going to get right into it. The question that I start out with everybody is, just tell us a little bit about your experience, however, you decide to go on about it, about having albinism, growing up with albinism, even discovery, what it meant to live with albinism.
Okay, that is a deep question. So with me personally, I didn't know I looked different until, oh my goodness, it had to be like the third or fourth grade. I really did not know I looked different from any other kid, which is super funny. So growing up, I guess skin color, that was never something that I was faced with. Until I remember this day, it's kind of sad now. All right, so I'm in the third grade and I'm sitting down and I remember we're having a conversation about race. And I remember I was just so confused on what to pick and what to choose. And I knew my parents were Black, but I didn't understand why I looked different. And it was super hard to swallow that pill. And the only thing I remember is my teacher, she sent the Black teacher over to talk to me. And so I'm sitting there and I'm talking to her. And I just remember the look on her face. She looked so sad and she looked so defeated as a woman, as a Black woman, as someone that was older, just talking to me. And I remember sitting there thinking what is her problem? Why does she look? And it probably didn't hit me for years later that I realized why she was so, why she looked so defeated. And I felt bad for her, even though she felt bad for me. And so, that happened. And then as I got older, everything just changed for me just growing up. I'm a very outgoing, talkative person, as you can see if anybody follows me. And growing up, I was always into something. I was always in the crowd. I was always moving. I was always running around. And so with that came, getting picked on. With that came to dealing with colorism. With that, it was just a lot, right? And I remember just growing up. And then I remember I had to make a decision one day, like, hey, what do I want to do? Do I want to be quiet? Do I want to kind of want to be reserved, laid back? Or do I want to say, nah, I'm going to be myself and just be out there, and whatever comes with that comes with it. And everything just changed for me once I got to high school, to be completely honest. Once I made that decision in high school, it was over. And it was a lot, what I'm saying. I had to deal with a lot, meeting people, as you can test to. You meet people who have either better vision than you, worse vision than you, which is always an eye-opener. You deal with certain people who can't be in the sun longer than you, but who can be in the sun way longer than you, so you're dealing with that. I didn't understand why every time I went outside, I had to put on sunblock as a kid, right? Now I understand. I didn't understand why I always had to wear a hat. Now I totally get it, what I'm saying? So it was a lot of learning experiences in there, but thank God my mom and my dad was really like helpful and really understanding and allowed me to be me.
That's awesome. And I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's always interesting when it comes to albinism, how we all at some point have those moments of where like, oh, I am different. And
Yeah.
then it leads to some sort of self-discovery in which hopefully ends up being a pivot to self-acceptance. I heard you mention that once you came to the realization that being different wasn't a bad thing and you were like, okay, game over.
Yeah.
Talked about that. And I'm wondering what it was like for the people around you. Like, how did they respond to that?
That's a great question. I think the hardest person who probably had to take everything was my mom. Just because with her, um, she was around me the most, even though I spent majority of my time with my sister. My dad, I grew up in a two-parent household. My dad, he worked a lot. It was times that when I woke up, every morning I woke up, my dad was already going to work. And it was sometimes I would go to sleep and he wasn't home yet. So, he was working a lot. So even though me and my sister are very close in age, the person who took it the hardest was my mom. And me and her had a lot of growing pains. So of me going through certain things, she didn't understand. Like, she's doing her best to try to understand and to make me comfortable, things of that nature. And I just remember, as I got older, once I got later in high school, and then she just saw like it was like a switch. And there's a bigger story in that. But and when that switch happened, I think for her, she realized like, all right, he's going to figure this out on his own. And I think it makes now she's super proud. Now she's super excited, which is funny because off mic, me and you was talking about the organization NOAH. And I remember as a child, somebody gave her a pamphlet about NOAH. She really wanted to take me to conferences. She really wanted me to like go to different things. And I was just like, no. Like, I was just adamant and no. And so like now it's full circle now that, hey, we're talking 15, 17, almost 20 years later. Now it's kind of like, oh shoot, maybe I do need, I'm reaching out to them now, like, hey, how can I help to turn that, for me, I didn't know nothing about those, about that organization, but now I'm like, hey, I'm learning more about it. I want to help out, things of that nature. So with the people around me, it was just a switch of like, okay, I think it was a sense of relief. It's the shortest way, even though I just took the longest way to get to that answer. It was like a sense of relief, like, okay, he got it. He's figuring this thing out and he's going to be A-okay.
That's beautiful, and I like the way you got to that conclusion because it kind of highlights one, the impact of what our parents and the people around us play, but it also kind of hits on the impact of us learning to be comfortable with our lack of pigmentation.
Yeah.
And some of the things you said kind of hit on this thing that I've been thinking about and talking about, and it's the intersectionality of being Black and having albinism, because those are Yeah, because like I have friends who, you know, are different ethnicities with albinism, like people who are white with albinism,
Mhm.
or maybe Puerto Rican with
Mhm.
albinism. There's so much intersectionality, but
Yeah,
specifically when it comes to being Black with albinism, I feel like there's a unique dynamic. Could you talk
absolutely.
about maybe some of the things that you noticed for you as a person who is Black and has albinism?
So, being someone that's Black with albinism, I think the biggest difference in, if anybody who's watching this, feel free to comment and correct me. So I'm not against that at all. I love being corrected. But um, the one thing I always notice that being Black is we're like the only race where we can't pass for anything else, right? Like it's hard when people see you and you're Black. Like every other race, um, when you meet somebody that's Caucasian and they have albinism, while somebody else with albinism can recognize it, everybody else just might assume, okay, they're just white with blonde hair, things of that nature, right? When you see people, whether they're Asian or, Hispanic, things of that nature, and you see them, they have albinism, it's like, all right, they're just that race, and people might just assume like they've dyed their hair. So then you come to us, those individuals who are Black, and you deal with so much, right? Because now people are questioning what's wrong, what happened. They asking you questions that you don't even know the answer to. Um, and then they start trying to tell you about yourself, which is even funnier in itself. And so then you're like fighting against this world where you're showing other individuals like, hey, I am Black, I am just as Black as you. We have the same Black experience, but then on top of that, we share the same Black experience, but then on top of that, I have to deal with a whole different Black experience because I have to deal with people that are Black as well, which is always interesting, which is always I've told my friends, I've said this, and like I said, I've always asked them to correct me if I'm wrong. I said, I don't think nobody's dealt with more colorism than me. And I said, the only person I believe that could deal with that even more is a woman with albinism. I was like, because um, so much happens. You know what I'm saying? It's hard being out here and you saying, hey, I'm Black. And then you want to wear like melanated shirts and you can't get one, or you're thinking, you know what I'm saying? But nobody don't think about that. Everybody make Black apparel. They don't ever think like, oh, shoot, it's a whole line of Black people that have no melanin in their skin, right? But they're still equally as Black. Um, then you start looking at in other countries how they treat people with albinism. So it's always that thing, right? So yeah, so being Black, and as the project that we're going to discuss is called Black and Blind, it is a difficult dynamic because, um, you know, one of the funnier parts is when I was younger, we used to have to find, photographers that can shoot somebody that, my dad is brown skin, and then I'm, on the opposite end of the spectrum, in
Mhm.
my bigger family, I have some people that are Black, and I mean dark Black, like dark
Mhm.
skin, you know what I'm saying? And then you have me. So who's going to photograph us correctly? You know what I'm saying? So it's always that dynamic.
Yeah, yeah, you spoke a lot of truth. And, you know, for those listening and watching, it's not that we're saying anybody else's experience is any less, but
Mhm.
the Black experience in and of itself is rooted in so much nuance that I
Yeah.
don't people fully understand it. And then you compile it with having a condition where you essentially lack pigmentation, which is the quote unquote marker for being Black. And,
Yeah.
you know, the reason why I was like, oh my gosh, I get it when you were talking about the shirts, because like I'll be in like Target somewhere and
Yeah.
they'll have like, you know, the picture of a Black woman in the afro, and it'll say
Mhm.
like, my Black is beautiful or something. And I'm like,
Yeah.
dang, I want that shirt.
Yeah.
But I will run into the fact of somebody seeing me wear that shirt, like, why are you wearing that shirt? You not
That
Black. And then I gotta go into a whole spiel. So
whole spiel, and you don't even want to do that. And then you know what it is? It's like, um, our race, us Hispanics, even Asian, um, we produce people, and it's other, backgrounds
yeah.
out there that I'm missing, but we produce people of like every shade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes when I look at Black apparel,
Mm-hmm.
they'll show little shade markers, right? And it's never
Mm-hmm.
our shade on there. It's either a little bit darker than us, and then it goes all the way to like pitch Black, right? And then it's like, dog, am I getting left out there? And then so there's this struggle of, you know, finding your Blackness, right? And then as Black people, as we know from a normal, or me and you have never experienced a normal Black experience. I don't think nobody's ever experienced a normal Black experience, but
Right.
what the society labels as normal, we're fighting that, and then we're fighting with everybody else that's Black, is figuring out, hey, what is our background beyond America, and things of that nature. So it's always interesting. And the funny story is, I was in college, and my teacher, I missed class one day, and my teacher was so upset, and me and her was laughing about it, because she said, I wanted you to share in class. It was an African American studies class. And she said, everybody has an experience of when they realized they were Black. And she said, all the other kids' experience usually happens around the same time, because they're Black kid, they're dark, their complexion. And she said, your experience is two-toned. She was like, it's just two different areas. You remember when you found out that you was Black, and then you remember when you found out you had albinism. And she was like, I want you to share it with the class, because nobody else had that experience. And I was like, well, I wish you would have told me. I said, because whatever, I missed class for something stupid. And so me and her laughed at that. And then so it didn't hit me. I mean, you have these reoccurring things of when you're Black, like everybody's like, oh, I remember as a Black male, this happened, right? And then I have, for instance, I'll give you an example. Everybody, all the Black males I know, we have an experience when we encountered the police, right? So that happens. Me, I remember the day I got pulled over as a Black male, and I remember the day I got pulled over and the police officer didn't know I was a Black male. And then as you're looking at my license, and then you're realizing like, oh shoot, he actually is Black, how that dynamic changed. You know what I'm saying? But nobody else, it's hard to share that experience with other people, because they're just not going to understand. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
always this nuance, like you said, of being Black and
And I
blind.
appreciate you sharing that. And for those who don't know, if you look on my channel and my IG page, I'm doing a Black History in Albinism, Chronic Illness, and Disability campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very intentional in including the story of this one individual by the name of Reverend Jesse Douglas. And
Mm-hmm.
so when people mostly talk about him, they show him in this picture of where he's walking with Dr. King, and they're linking arms, and they're actually protesting in a march from Selma to Montgomery, which took 18 days. And he helped
Mm-hmm.
organize this. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I found his story, it gave me a sense of solidarity, in the sense that, like, dang, like, I see someone for the first time in my entire life, not only in disability history, not only in Black history, but in the history of people with albinism. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's rare, because a lot of us, back then, there in the time of the civil rights movement, if you had a disability, medical condition, mental
Mm-hmm.
illness, chronic illness, you were institutionalized, which is why I
Absolutely.
believe you don't see a lot of our people in these stories. So, when you talked about that tension, it is a very real thing. Like, and then I think one of the things that stood out to me about your Black and Blind campaign was the fact that for the first time, I got to see art, not just Black art or art in general, but art showcasing people with albinism in such a tasteful and powerful way.
Look, let me tell you
Which,
why that's funny. So I get accepted into this program,
Mhm.
this mentorship program at the Light Factory. Shout out to them. I have to shout them out, because they went out on the ledge and they invited 7 Black photographers to come in and create an exhibit. And
Mm.
none of our exhibit, none of us shot the same thing. None of us knew what nobody was shooting. But at the end, we was able to tell one main story through a curator, which was super amazing. So shout out to them for that. And so I remember I'm talking to the professor, the mentor, and I'm talking to, his name is Titus Brooke Higgins. He's actually in North Carolina. He's up there in Raleigh, which is a little far from us. But talking to him, and he says, what you want to shoot? And so I tell him, and so I email this to him, right? He calls me immediately. He says, look, I need to talk to you about your project. And I'm like, okay, what's up? And he said, how are you going to shoot these individuals? So I'm telling him, and he said, perfect. And I was like, what's going on? And he was like, he said, one of his friends her name is Nikki. He's explaining about her. He's talked about how she has albinism and he shoots her occasionally, regularly, excuse me. He said, I did not want you to fall into this, hey, I'm shooting people with the albinism, I'm going to objectify them, right? He's like, I didn't want you to do nothing trendy. I didn't want you to do anything where it's like, okay, you know. And I was like, no, I was like, as a person with albinism, when you see it, it's kind of like cringy, but nobody don't say nothing. So sometimes I feel like with us, we sometimes want to be included in so much. And so we allow ourselves to like, all right, I'll let you do this. And it's tough, right? Because I've never seen, I love the NBA. I love basketball. As you see behind me, I got my tennis shoes up. I used to have a sports podcast. Like, I love basketball, right? I've never seen a person with albinism play basketball, right? I don't know anybody with albinism that's in the NFL, you know. So we're talking about sports, then you're talking about music. There's a couple of people that do music, a few people that do acting, things of that nature. So it's far in between, right? And so we love to be included. So yes, when I was creating this project, my thing was, I was very simple. I did kind of like what you're doing now. I was interviewing people. Some of it was we just sat there and we just talked, and in the midst of talking to them, just snapping. And then when I got home, I was able to look at the pictures and figure out, all right, what told their story and what was able to be said that I think was translated through these images. So it was a super cool experience. And I'm so grateful for everybody that helped and everybody that supported, because the support is still pouring in, and I'm super grateful for it.
Yeah, that's dope. And I think, you know, I'm not a photographer, but I am an artist in various capacities, from music to visual art. And I think it's important for us to have, you know, things that we can point to and say, wow, I see myself in that, you know, representation. And I think what you said is the difference between someone just taking a photo and someone creating art, because you're involving that person's story and their journey, and you're compiling that with emotion and lighting and effects to get the desired result of telling that story.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, like, well, you know, I see you in lingerie, let's snip snap, you know.
Yeah.
No shots fired to anybody, but I'm just saying.
Absolutely. No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
So we've talked about this project, and I bet people are wondering what in the world it is. But before we get to Black and Blind, let's talk about your journey of becoming a photographer.
Oh my gosh. So all right, I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I became a photographer in college, my sophomore year of college. Facebook was popping. For those who not know, I was on Facebook probably in like 05, 04, back when Facebook came out and you needed like access to get on. It wasn't just like putting your email sign up, you needed actual access. And so all my friends are still on MySpace at this time. And so by the time everybody got to Facebook, I was there, and I remember sitting there and I had no way of excuse me, I'm in college and I'm sitting there on Facebook. And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, what's the easiest way to talk to girls? Well, all these girls need their pictures taken, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's on MySpace or Facebook. So I'm like, cool. So I started doing that. And then, you know, you just get wrapped up in college. I'm about to graduate. Photography ain't paying no bills. So I'm kind of just like, all right, whatever. We'll see what happens. And I stopped doing it. And I graduate. I'm looking for a job. And fast forward, I'm looking for a job. Oh, so people start now contacting me like, hey, I'm graduating too. I need graduation pictures. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. Taking graduation pictures, making that happen. Then you fast forward, and then I remember I'm at work one day and I'm about to quit, or I'm either going to quit, get a better job, or I'm going to get a second job. But I'm really leaning towards the second job because I really liked my job at the time. And I remember this young lady, I'm talking to her and I'm like, yo, I'm about to quit. Like, this ain't it no more. I'm not making enough money. I'm like, whatever. And she goes, well, why don't you just charge people to take pictures? And I was like, it was the simplest thing ever. And it's the simplest thing I've never thought of. And I'm like, wait, what? Charge people? She was like, yeah, why don't you charge people? Fast forward, that woman now is my wife. Shout out to her. And it was just funny sitting there, and I became a photographer like literally that day. like that day when, you know, I had done little gigs before then. But after that, I really started focusing on, all right, how do I make money? How do I help other people? And what do I want to do? Shout out to the Light Factory again, because that young lady, like I said, my wife, she was a girl I was still just friends with at work. She bought me a class at the Light Factory, and I learned so much about how to use my camera, what I'm doing wrong with my camera, things of that nature, which was super cool. And today I'm a full-time photographer. I've been doing it full-time for like 4 years now. It's a lot of ups, a lot of downs. But it's more ups and downs, I'll tell you that. And it's super fun. I have a photography podcast. I get to travel doing photography, which is super cool. You know, I got a couple weddings that's out, you know, a couple weddings that's out the country this year.
Oh, wow.
I didn't travel, I didn't been places. So I'm grateful for what I get to do every day. Every day I get to wake up and say, all right, this is what I love to do. How do I make it happen? And it's a blessing. Honestly, it's a blessing.
That's awesome. I'm curious to know, like, again, shout out to your wife. I'm
Yeah.
curious to know that as a person with albinism, did your level of vision impairment impact like your journey of becoming a photographer?
I'll tell you this. I was super scared at first, right?
Mhm.
Um, because I'm one of the lucky ones, and I understand I'm blessed, and
Mhm.
I'm grateful for that, and I thank God for that every day. Because I remember going to get my learner's permit in high school, right? And I remember sitting there and not understanding if I was going to be able to drive. You know what I'm saying? And so I was scared, and I remember you know, sitting there and they have me to do the vision test, and I'm like shaking. I'm like, yo, I'm about to just lie, cheat, however I do this, because I wanted to drive so bad, right? And so I was able to drive, and I'm able to drive now today, and I'm super glad. So now you do that, and now you come into where details matter. Um, we're talking about details matter, that when you're shooting, and if your photo's out of focus, you don't want to work with me. You know what I'm saying? Um, if something, let's say, joke, I'm being serious, but it's funny enough. Yesterday in my photography group, we're having a critique, right?
Mhm.
And so it's my photography group, by the way. So I post one of my images, and I'm like, all right, and I know this image is fire. And shout out to her name is Angie Perez. She is mad cool. She is a dope Puerto Rican photographer in Orlando. She is amazing. And she ripped my photo up, and I needed it. It was so truthful. It was so raw to the point that I DM'd her and was like, thank you for it. And the reason I'm telling you that is because she pointed out so many details that I missed. And it's one of those things where, like, now I can't be ashamed. I have to zoom all the way in on stuff. I have to blow stuff up to get little details, because um my dad is gonna laugh when he hears this part. My family used to have a cleaning business when I was a kid. We had a janitorial business, and they would never let me vacuum. And I never understood why. And
Mm.
then finally my mom goes, "We don't let you vacuum because you can't see certain stuff. And like you think you've seen it and you think he's clean and it's really not." And so like now I have to really check and double check, and I'm cool with that, cuz at first it's embarrassing, right?
Yeah.
Um and you know, when you're in school, it's one of those things where it's like you don't want to sit on the front row, and then as you get older, you're just like, yo, I have to sit on the front row because my grades is more important than the rest of y'all who ain't gonna pass if I'm sitting in the back, right? Um, and so as you get older, and by the time I got to college, I always sat on the front row. I didn't care. I'm like, look, I'm paying for this now. It gotta
Mhm.
happen. And so like now I have to go back and check. I have to double check. I have to zoom in on certain stuff. I have to. And so like now my biggest things have always been my stuff has to be in focus. And I give you a cheat code when I'm photographing. I had to figure out what makes a normal eye say that an image is in focus, right? Well, if I
Mm.
focus on your eyes, a general rule of thought is like the rest of the image is going to be in focus. If your eyes is in focus, nobody's going to say, hey, her eyes are in focus, but her mouth is a little bit blurry. Nobody's going to say that. But
Mhm.
people notice if your eyes is blurry and your mouth is in focus. People going to be like, yeah, I can't even see her eyes. Like, what's going on? So I have to pay attention to those things, focusing there, understanding what lighting truly is. That's why I was laughing when when you sent out the instructions for the podcast, you was like, you need a good lit room, and I'm always paying attention to those things. So it's a lot of things where I pay attention to as well. Just being an artist and a photographer and understanding where I have maybe a disadvantage at, but I have to make sure I kill it so that I can, be stronger in other areas.
That's awesome. And thank you for sharing that, because you hit on several things. One, as a creator. No. I like it when you hit when people like mention several things, because it's relatable. Especially as a person with albinism, like as a content creator, when I first started out, I had typos like you wouldn't believe. Now I'm like and here's the thing, like I don't always catch them because of my vision. And so now like maybe I'll have one or two on a rare occasion, and somebody may be like, you misspelled this. But once it's posted, because I'm a perfectionist, I'm learning that done is better than perfect in some cases, especially when I have put my heart and soul into something and everything else is fine. But one thing, I'm learning to give myself grace.
I always remember, it's progress over perfection.
Yes.
That's my motto on everything.
Say progress over for the people in the back.
Listen, no matter, and this is important. I want everybody to hear this. No matter what you're doing, whether you have albinism or not, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're a photographer, you are a podcaster, YouTuber, whatever, get started, yo. Get started, keep it going, because progress is always over perfection. Progress will, when you get started on something, you're gonna make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. It's actually funny, and then as you keep going, a lot of us haven't started on our dreams. We haven't started on a project because we wanted to be so perfect, right? No, Gavin, I can't start on my website right now because I don't have every exact picture I need, or I don't have exactly the information. So I'm not gonna get started. And the next thing you know, it's 5 years later and your website is not up. Or we're looking at it and saying, hey, I want to be a makeup artist one day. And it's like, but I don't have every palette that's available. I don't have every concealer, foundation, lipstick, whatever the case may be. And then you never get started because you've never, you're so worried about being perfect. But sometimes, once you get started, you will figure it out. I was laughing a little early because you was talking about typos. I used to be a marketing coordinator for Marriott. And so I was there, and I remember my DOSM, so director of sales and marketing, she used to pull me in her office all the time because I was in charge of posting social media content. And she used to talk to me all the time about how I would mess up with typos. And I didn't know how to tell her, basically, like, yo, I don't see that. Like, I see it now that you pointed it out to me, but trust me, I did not purposely give you something with that. And then so, but it was one of those things where like now I had to realize that, all right, I got to go back. I got to reread stuff 3 times. Then what I started doing before I even sent it to her, I was sending it to somebody else. You know what I'm saying? So you got to live with that. You know what I'm saying? And no matter who you are, don't be afraid. If you get it right, that's cool. That's what we all strive for perfection, but you have to get started to get perfect. And so just start. Sir. That's all.
Sir. Let me just say, I talk about this all the time because I'm an advocate for invisible disabilities, albinism, and chronic illness. And I do like podcasting or social media marketing and design consultations for people who fall under those categories. And a lot of times people will come to me like, well, all I have is this phone and this rinky-dink tripod, and I'm trying to, do the right things. And I'm like, get started, because, and it's not something that I'm just like, have this ethereal sense of knowledge, from the clouds. Like, I had to learn, like, the part of being perfectionistic is procrastinating at times when you feel like you can't do something perfect. And so I had to challenge myself, and I had to place people around me that would challenge me to say, look, you need to stop overthinking this, put it out there. Like, I have a mentor, and he does a lot. He's a rapper, content creator, healthcare executive. The man does a lot. And he really like put my feet to the fire and was like, you need to stop worrying about having the perfect setup in this. You need to do what God called you to do because somebody need to hear your message, regardless of what little pretty package you're trying to put it in. And so it was kind of like, okay, I need to replace my edges after that. But learning to receive that type of wisdom and like act on it, like put something out there and not over criticize myself, but focus on the messaging. That is so key.
Absolutely, because then you can always go back. I remember when I first got started in, I was trying to learn how to pay myself through my business, right? And so I remember I found this woman's video on how to pay yourself through an LLC, and it was super cool. The video was horrible, and it was like 10 years old, and it was like the information was 10, but the design, the mic, the video was like a 3. And so I laughed because I got notified that she made another video on YouTube. And so I go back and I watch it, and she starts the video off and she goes, "Hey, if you've seen my old video on how to pay yourself through an LLC, this is the exact same video. I'm literally going to repeat the same information." And she said, "Unfortunately, that last video got so many views and it helped so many people. I technically can't take it down from YouTube because, I'm still getting views and it's still getting clicks." She's like, "But that video is so ugly that for my mindset, I have to really do this. For my mental health, I have to redo it, the video." And so I laughed. And then she talked about like, the people that have the biggest YouTubes right now, or think if anybody goes back, I encourage anybody, if you listen, no matter what you love, whether it's YouTube, whether it's your favorite podcast, no matter what, your favorite photographer, your favorite artist, your whoever that person is, go find their first ever release. You know what I'm saying? And see what it looks like. And understand that person said, "You know what? They never said this is the perfect whatever, right? They just said, I'm going to get started today, and boom, here it is." I cringe when I look back at like my first set of pictures ever. They're horrible. But I was just out there like, I gotta get started. And it was cool. It was something I enjoyed doing. I think about like I do a lot of maternity work now, photography wise, and I look at like my first maternity photo shoot, which is of my sister, by the way, and she laughs at me all the time because the pictures was horrible, and I think we shot them in our parents' living room. Like that's how bad they are, and it's the colors. It's oh my gosh, it's awful. But me and her laugh now from like what I used to do and what I do now, and it's just like, look, I had to get started somewhere because if I was ever always trying to be perfect, I would have never got started. So absolutely. Just to reiterate, progress over perfection.
Yeah. That is I think that's really important. A really important message to kind of hammer, because sometimes as people with disabilities or even albinism or vision impairments, we can get so stuck on our symptoms or the things about us that are a bit different that we kind of hinder our own progress in a sense. So I appreciate you talking about that. And we're going to transition a little bit. So you talked about your experience with albinism and photography and how those things kind of intertwine. I'm curious to know what it has been like for you now that you have reached a level of professionalism in your career.
For me now, it's super interesting now. So I go back when I was working in the corporate world. That was always interesting for me. Sometimes, all right, let me tell you why that's interesting. The joke is, the gag is that nobody talks about is that when you're Black and you have albinism, sometimes you get in spaces where people forget that you're Black, right? And you're sitting in these spaces and people are sharing their thoughts on people of color, and then they forget like, oh shoot, this person is actually a person of color, and you have to remind them like, hey, no, I'm gonna call you out on, your discrimination of you being prejudiced or you being racist, whatever the case may be, right? And so I've been in those situations where I've been in corporate rooms, I've been in corporate meetings, and I understand that sometimes I've been in some of those rooms because I made other people feel comfortable. Hey, we got a Black guy here, but he looks our same, he's our same shade. We should be fine, right? So I've been there. And then I remember, the transition is now we're fighting injustices, and now I'm in these corporate rooms and I'm like, well, newsflash, sorry for y'all, I'm black, so now I'm cutting up. You know what I'm saying? I don't understand certain things. I'm putting y'all feet to the fire. When I used to work for a company, and I remember during Black History Month or just Black events, I wanted to know why our organization wasn't targeting or helping or assisting people of color, but they were helping other organizations. So, now I'm in those rooms and I'm demanding answers. And so that was that. And so I finally leave corporate America, and now so I work for myself. So now being a person with albinism is super interesting and cool now, because I work with certain people, and a lot of times I'm their first person that they met or come across that has albinism, right? Or I'm their child's first encounter with somebody with albinism. And so now, once they leave me, their child is asking questions. Their child wants to be educated. Their child is want to know, their child to see something. I have a friend, and I remember she told me her daughter saw an ad with a child with albinism in it, and she was like, "Oh, that kid looks like our photographer." You know what I'm saying? And told me just how excited her daughter was. Like, hey, I know exactly why this person looks like this. This person has albinism. My photographer looks the exact same way. So like now I'm in those situations where, there is times where I get to educate individuals. There are times where it's like, it's super fun. I get to meet people of different walks of life. I've shot people with albinism through this project. So that's like a whole different aspect. So yeah, it's been a blessing. It's been super interesting though.
Yeah, and you hit on kind of the next question I thought about is like your project, Black and Blonde. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but if you could explain it for those who aren't sure what it is, and then talk about what it's been like for you as a person with albinism to pursue this.
So all right, so I got started. Shout out to Lala Milan. She's a creator, a content creator. She's super cool. And where were we at? We were in Vegas, and me and her was sitting and we were talking. And by the way, sorry, I call this a squirrel moment. If you're ever in Vegas and you have albinism, please make sure you bring all the sunblock in the world. But yes, please bring all that. So super cool place. So anyway, I'm in Vegas. I'm talking to Jay, and we're sitting there, and um she asked me, have I ever thought about shooting people with albinism? And I'm like, yeah, I want to, but I just don't know the project. And she said, look, I promise you, if you dive into this project, because we're bouncing ideas at this moment. And she said, if you dive into this project, it's going to change your world. It's going to change your life. You need to tap into this. And so I'm like, all right. And before we're out there for a few days. And before I come back to Charlotte and she goes back to LA, she looks at me and she said, do this project. I promise you, you need to do it. And she even texted me later to see if I got started on it. And so I was super grateful and thankful. So I had this grand project. I still need to do that particular project that me and her discussed. And that's a whole nother subject, like trying to figure out the right way of photographing people with albinism. So anywho, I'm on my way back home, and I get presented with this opportunity to be in a mentorship program. And I'm like, all right, I know I got a baby coming. I know my life is about to switch up and change. And so I do not have time for this mentorship program. So I fill it out, but I understand that I probably won't be selected just because I don't have the time. And it's just a lot going on, right? And I get selected. And so now I'm like, oh shoot, what am I gonna do? And so I was like, well, I always wanted to shoot this project. I want to shoot people with albinism. So to fast forward, I told you guys earlier about me talking to Titus, and Titus is like, oh yeah, this is right on, like, do this project. So now I'm presented with this opportunity. I have and I send you the link so we can share with everybody. But on there, I do an artist statement of why I chose to shoot people with albinism. And my main goal is said in the last sentence, which is I want everybody to see themselves, and I want everybody to see themselves in us, especially for people that's Black. It's tough. My goal throughout this whole project was when I spoke to everybody that had albinism, and whether I spoke to the kids' parents or the actual individuals, I told everybody, I was like, I would love that now that the kids that come up after, you know, me and you, when they go to school, that, hey, everybody gets picked on in school, right? But maybe it turns into, hey, we're all getting picked on an equal level, so to speak, right? Or, you know, now it's really just jokes. It's just kidding around. It's not really, I'm trying to be hurtful, things of that nature. And only way we get there is if people are educated on people with albinism, like to understand, hey, just why you look like this. Or why is your hair that color? You know, as most people see, the hair on my head is blonde. Uh, Shout out to everybody that always assumes I'm bald until they meet me and they realize, oh, he actually has hair. And then, you know, the hair on my beard is brown. You know what I'm saying? I even have black hairs in here. I have a lot of blonde hairs, but it mixes in and it looks brown. And so you're doing that. I want to be able to help so more people are just educated on this matter. And part of that is, hey, we got to start presenting people out there more. So like, yes, there needs to be a thing, whether it's, you know, we can start at Black History and then we got to start knocking out these other, you know, other months. But it's like, hey, when we start talking about Black people, where are the people with albinism? You know, people that have other, when it's Black opportunities, other people, there's plenty of content creators that have some form of disabilities, but where are they? Why aren't we highlighting those individuals? So we need to start talking about those things. And so I'm getting there, and this project I knew the subject, but it was just missing something. And so my first project, my first 2 shoots I did, my professor didn't like it. Me and him laugh about it now. He hated it, which was fine because it caused me to go back. And after those first 2 projects, I realized I wasn't really talking to the individuals I was shooting. And so then it turned into, now I'm talking to all these subjects, people with albinism, and I'm asking them about their experiences. You know, I shot one gentleman, he was, I want to say like mid 50s. His experience was totally different from the 6-year-old I shot. You know, I shot her mom, and shout out to Mariah. She just had her baby. She's up there near you, matter of fact. And me and her had talked. And so I'm talking to her, and I'm talking to her as a woman, like, what was it like to have albinism, whether it was, you know, going to school, dating, things of that nature, you know, meeting people. And she's an educator. So I was talking to her like, hey, how is it, like, some of these kids, they're going to remember that, man, my teacher has albinism, and they're going to remember that. So now when they meet somebody in high school, that's super dope, that by the time they get to high school, you know, they're going to be like, oh, no, I already know that kid. That kid has albinism. The reason why I know, because my 3rd grade teacher had albinism, you know, things of that nature. And we all know, me and you both know, like, when you meet kids, they don't really have a filter. They ask questions and they just want to know the answer. They don't care. They just like, yo, I want that answer. So that situation. And so I'm talking to different individuals. I met a young man I think he was in the 8th grade. And so, you know, he's excited for high school, but he's super nervous for high school. And so, you know, and then the cool part was, I took my dad on the shoot with me. So he was able to talk to the parents, you know, which was super cool for him. My sister got to speak to one of the moms of the 6-year-old I shot, and it was super cool there. And so, you know, now we're connecting, and you're connecting families, and you're just having this cool network. So it was an eye-opening experience, and the lessons I learned was just amazing. They were just amazing, to be honest with you. I realized that a lot of people had the same experiences I had, but now I'm talking to people that had totally different experiences than I had.
I think that's really beautiful, and it speaks to the fact that, you know, we always say the Black experience is not a monolithic experience. We know that.
Absolutely.
But the same is true with albinism. Like, living with albinism is not something that is, you know, a one size fits all perspective. Like, we all have different challenges, experiences, but the things that tie us together are some of those common things that we experience. Like, you know, the kids, you know, not having any filter. Like, all of us can relate to that. I've been, Daddy, what's going on? I was in a grocery store.
Yep, it always happens at the grocery store.
Always. And I was like, I guess I was like looking at like canned goods or something like this close. And I don't have really good peripheral vision. So like my hearing is where I depend on, like, determining direction is. And so I turn and I'm looking for my brother, and I see a little girl walk past, and on the next aisle, like when she got past the aisle, she goes, "Mommy, I saw an angel." And I was like, "Oh."
That's actually cool.
And then I've had other stories where a parent and the child, I was at the end of the cashier aisle, and they both were just pointing at me and staring at me as I walked by. That was not cool.
You know, the sad part is we all have those experiences, and then it's like you think you're the only one until you meet somebody else, right? I've had that. I've had situations where people didn't want to touch me. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, it's something, I remember one time we was at a summer camp, and I was like, me and my sister was super, super young. We was at a summer camp, and it was like a Christian summer camp, right? And so we're having prayer, and I remember like, it was like 2 girls. They were super cool with me, right? But they refused to like hold my hand when it was time to pray. And it was just like, and they both told me, they was just like, "Nah, I don't want to get what you got." Like, you deal with those type of things, right? And then you come across the complete opposite is you'll meet somebody, and I remember I met a guy, and he told me he wished he had albinism. I was just like, really? And like, but it was like, you have those situations, and that came full circle because I'm shooting one of the subjects, and I remember the older guy who I shot, man, he was the second person with albinism I ever met, and I'm super grateful for him. But I remember sitting with him. He's the second person I ever met. I went to high school with his daughter, and I remember sitting there with him and talking to him. And he asked me, he said, "How's everything going?" I said, "Everything's good. Everything, like now everything's in life is perfect, whatever." And so me and him, and he was like, "All right." And he was like, "Man, excuse me." I was talking to him, and I was like, "So how's everything with you?" And he's like, "Man, I've come such a long way." And I'm like, "I bet, what I'm saying, you're at an age I can't wait to get to." And he said, "Man," he said, "I grew up in New York having albinism during the crack era." And I just remember, I just sat there. And he said, "Dude," he said, "people like you now, about albinism, and the generation under you is learning more." And he said, "When I was coming up, nobody knew what albinism was. It was so far in between." He said, "People used to keep their kids in the house, like whatever." He said, "I grew up in New York when crack was in the streets." And he said, "It was rough for me." He's like, "Every day I walked out of my house and I had to fight because somebody wanted to pick on me, and they thought, I had to fight for my life, literally." And he was talking about family members that didn't want to deal with him because of the way he looked. And he's like, "I had to deal with that as a child. I had to deal with that growing up." He's like, "It made me a tough man today." And I remember sitting there thinking like, okay, I didn't got in a couple of fights as a guy, people try you, you got to fight. And I remember like, but listen to him saying, "No, it was every day for me. I walked out my house and I had to fight every day." And he was like, I remember one time he told me, he said, like his dad told him like, "Nah, you're not coming back into the crib until you fight." You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not gonna let them just pick on you. And he was like, I had to deal with that. And so now, and then I'm thinking about my issues, and I'm like, well, my issues are so minor compared to this. You know what I'm saying? So it is amazing. You meet people and they share similar experiences with you, but then, as a child, I was taught like, hey, everybody don't carry the same cross, and you got to be cool with carrying yours, and you gotta be grateful to carry yours. So I had to understand that, and that was an eye opener for me as well.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, because you dropped some gems, and that gentleman dropped some gems. And I've always had like a special reverence for older people. But like when you meet someone who's older and who's lived with like albinism or vision impairment or something like that, it's like a whole nother level of respect, because they grew up in a different time, where information wasn't at their fingertips, and they had to kind of to rough it out or tough it out. So hearing that is always, it brings to mind like how far we've come, and being grateful for that, but also being aware of, because of the things they went through, we get the opportunity to educate people so that nobody has to go through that again.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna take a pivot.
Okay.
We're entering the last phase, man, and I want you to kind of share what has helped you to become better and not bitter. What or who?
Um, I have to say my family. It has to be my family. I had to thank them and praise them. And part of my project was each set I wanted to dedicate each set to a family member of mine's, right? And by the time I got to the end and I wanted to dedicate the whole set, I ended up dedicating the whole set to my mom. And the reason why is because like I told you earlier, sorry, I was just thinking about how I'm gonna present this. So like I told you earlier, like my mom was there through every little growing pain that I had. Um, everyone. And even though I had both parents in the home and I'm super close with my sister, my sister was there as like a protector sometimes, even though she's younger than me. And if anybody see my sister, she's like 90 pounds, holding 90 pounds. She's a tiny little thing. And but my sister always had like this big thing, like nobody is gonna mess with my brother. I'm not having that. And she used to always do that. And used to make me laugh as a kid, but I was super grateful for it, right? My dad used to always want to make sure I was a-okay. He didn't care what it took. He was willing to do whatever it took to make sure I was okay. And he always was a protector as well. But my mom was a lot different because she was like, she if my mom could fix everything, she would have. I believe my sister and dad would too, but my mom was just a little different because she was more vocal. She was more of a, look, I'm trying to understand. She was out there looking for help, looking for information, looking for stuff I didn't even know about. Like I said, she found Noah, that organization, and she was willing to do whatever. My mom was like, look, we can get in the car right now and go to whatever conference, meeting, whatever. So it was super dope. But my family was like my rock, just because it was like, hey, we're going to be okay, but what can we do to make you okay, to make you strong, to make you feel um comfortable, whatever that may be. So if it was times where I used to have this thing, and I tell all parents now, especially parents of little boys, your son is not going to want to wear sunscreen, right? And so that was the joke about me doing this whole project. I'm speaking to little boys and I'm explaining to them like, hey, your mom wants me to talk to you that you need to be putting on your sunscreen. And I didn't have my mom used to just tell me all the time, but I never had nobody else to come to me and tell me that. And so, but my family used to do this thing where they would pack sunscreen for me because I would magically forget. And so it was a joke. It was super funny. And so I remember like having those experiences, and like now transitioning to like, I married this woman, my wife, and she's beyond amazing. And I always felt like she never saw me as like different, or looked at me different, or looked at me as like, oh, you have albinism, which I was super grateful for, because she just treats me like a black man. And now, mind you, she understands that I have some areas where I'm just not strong at, or I'm just, and she fills in the gaps. And I'm super grateful for that. You know what I'm saying? So I'm super grateful. I try to be super helpful. And those understanding like all of that, and understanding that, hey, there might be an opportunity for me to help out in the future and to give back. I believe everybody, no matter who you are, what you do, you need to find your purpose in life. And for me, I understood that my purpose was to help other people through photography, whether it's through their business, whether it's in telling their story, however I may do. And because I'm able to do that, I believe that is my purpose, and that's how I'm able to give back to this world. And that helps me not to be bitter. Literally, it literally understanding that, and with the help of God and my family, and they just been my rock, and I'm super grateful, super thankful, super blessed. I can't even stress that enough. Like, I am lucky.
That's
And
awesome.
I remember those days where I was just like, I ain't lucky. Like, what am I doing? Like, what is going on? How did we get here? And now I'm looking back, I'm like, I wouldn't have it no other way. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know any other way, but I wouldn't have it no other way. If, somebody said, hey, we can give you this, I'm like, nah, because it makes me who I am. Now, as a photographer, especially in my city, I get recognized because of the way I look now, which is super funny. Um, so I'm one of the well-known photographers just in Charlotte, just because people, they see the work, and then they'll see me on Instagram, and then when they run into me, whether it's at a restaurant or at a bar or wherever the case, no matter where I may be at, right, they'd be like, hey, aren't you Gavin? And I'm like, yeah. And then they'll go into a whole different discussion, but I'm very recognizable. So I'm super grateful for it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and shout out to your family and of course the God.
Yeah.
With that being said, I want to give you the opportunity to plug all of the things that you want to plug, whether it be your socials, your projects, your YouTube channel, your podcast, you name it, name it.
Cool. I want to everybody just do me a favor, check out my Instagram is IM_Gavin B. Look up gavinboulware.com and you'll find me on all those. If you no matter what social network you're on, if you type in IM_Gavin B, check it out. I will say this. I would love for everybody to check out the Paid Exposure Photography podcast. It's catered to Black and brown photographers. What that means is why we accept any and everybody. We want everybody that's a photographer or videographer to tune in and chime in. It is catered to Black and brown photographers, so it gets a little fun. We talk about a little bit of everything, all Black and brown issues, but we love everybody that's in there, and everybody is in there. So check that out. And if you ever get a chance, definitely go to my website and check out the Black and Blind exhibition. It's right now, it's up at the Light Factory. It's going to be moving around, but it's going to be up to the middle of this year. So I'm super excited for that and super grateful.
Thank you again for sharing that. And I just want to say thank you for, gracing us with your talent, your time, your wisdom, your presence, all those wonderful things. And, I look forward to having more conversations and working with you. And to those who tuned in on the live and who will see this on the replay, just want to say thank you. You guys are the real MVPs. And without further ado, remember to become better and not bitter, one day at a time.
There you go.